Hey everybody, I'm here today with a video on how I added texture paste over pattern paper just to give it even more interest and more texture. I'm going to be using the brand new Paper Divas stamp that's called Dream Big. There's a look at the card, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm first going to take this circle, they call it a mask at Stampin' Up. It's basically a stencil. And I'm just going to use this Faber-Castell whip spackle and a palette knife just to put that over the stencil. Now I'm not going to be too careful or perfect with this. I just want a nice thick layer of it. And I'm using the whip spackle and I like it a whole lot better than texture paste, which is Ranger product. And that's what I first started out with when the whole texture paste craze was going on. I used the texture paste from Ranger and I hated it. Maybe you feel differently, maybe you love it, but for me it was just too brittle. It wasn't flexible enough. Every time I used it, it would crack on me and I got really frustrated with it. So I set it aside and I put it away, and then I went to use it one day and it was completely dried out. I found this spackle, it was on clearance at Michael's, and I picked it up and thought I'd give it a try, and I love it. So I went ahead and I just put that on there. You can see that nice raised texture it gives to it. And this is also a spongy product when it dries, which I also love. So I'm going to go ahead and use this distress glitter. It's the Rock Candy Distress Glitter. And I'm just going to sprinkle this over the spackle while it's still wet. And just to make sure that it gets nice and embedded in there and doesn't fall off, I'm going to go ahead and dump the remaining contents of that jar out onto my paper. I'll flip over the pattern paper onto it and just kind of push my fingers on top of it just to press that glitter nice, get it nice and embedded so it doesn't flake off and get everywhere. I'll go ahead and tap off the extra. And there you can see I've got a nice, shiny, textured there on top of the pattern paper. So it just gives even more interest to the card, even more depth, and I really like the look of it. So I've got this Dream Big. It's just a sentiment stamp. It's from Paper Divas. It's brand new, and it is linked below if you want to go check it out. I've got this piece of Canson watercolor paper, and it measures, let's see, it looks like about 3.5 by 2 inches. And it's just, how I do it is I measure the size of the acetate that the stamp comes on, and then that fits the sentiment pretty well whenever I go to stamp these out. So I put that in my MISTI, and I went ahead and used my embossing bag just to prep that cardstock, ink this up with Versamark ink and stamp it down. And I did double stamp because I'm using watercolor paper. Now I'm going to go ahead and use some Detail Ranger clear embossing powder, sprinkle that on and tap off the extra. And I'm going to do an emboss resist technique. Very, very, very easy to do. So I'll just sprinkle this on, and I always do it twice. I don't know why. I think it was pretty well the first time, but I always, it's like an OCD habit or something. I always do it twice. So I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun and heat this up, and it's really hard to see because you are using clear on white, so you're not going to be able to see it at all, but it's on there, I promise, and it's nice and melted. And then I'm just going to do an embossed resist technique with watercolor. So I went ahead and wet my cardstock with a pretty big brush there. And then I'm just going to use a smaller brush and drop in some distress ink that's on my palette there. This is Evergreen Bow Distress ink, and I'm adding quite a few layers just to make sure it's nice and dark and you can really read that sentiment. Now I've got a wood grain embossing folder here, and I'm just going to emboss this piece of coral cardstock. Now I have a different one linked below, and if you are going to buy a wood grain embossing folder, I suggest you buy that one. It is about the same price that I purchased mine at. However, it is a 6x6, and I love a 6x6 embossing folder. It's so much larger and it gives you a lot of wiggle room to work with. Now when I emboss this, I have no tabs on my platform just because I get a lot of pressure with my machine, so it often cracks my cardstock. So I just put no tabs down, and that's what works for me. You may need to play around with your machine and see what works best for you. So there I've got my embossed piece of cardstock, and I'm going to start assembling my card. First, I wanted to attach my sentiment to my wood grain embossed piece of cardstock, and I'm just using double-sided adhesive for that. Then my pattern paper is the same size as an A2 top folding card base, so I just have adhesive on the back of it. I will peel that off and line it up and stick it down. You can see I already have my fun foam on the back of my wood grain embossed piece there, and before I stick that down on top of the center of my pattern paper, I did lay down a string or a messy nest of white thread and just attached my white fun foam with double-sided adhesive on top of that. I did use a little bit of glossy accents to squirt behind just to make sure that it really stuck onto that texture paste, and that finished the card off for today. Very simple and a little different, but I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will leave you with just a few pictures. For more information and the complete supply list, you can visit my blog, craftingwhilecaffeinated.wordpress.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy crafting!